Hi, I'm Natarelli. I'm the managing partner here at Emblem in New York City. We're an independent agency with offices in 5 countries. And we're in the business of shaping emblematic brands. We do this for clients of every size and industry all over the world. And what I'm hoping to share with you today is a new perspective on marketing, a new thinking around how to orient your brands for more maximum impact and performance. As you probably are feeling this particular force, proliferation is the ever-increasing growth of brands, those that are shouting for our attention. It's becoming also harder for marketers to sort of rise above the din, and for consumers it's hard to decipher the signal from the noise. Compounding this is the challenge of control. Increasingly, as we move from push to pull, consumers are ultimately in control of the message, when, where, and how they receive it. And technology is playing that role of gateway or interface to most of our brand experiences today. And so it can be a great enabler or a detractor from the bonds that we're trying to form with our stakeholders. And finally, and most importantly, is what we understand and know about the brain. Behavioral scientists have now proven that when we make decisions, emotion drives those decisions. And yet our marketing is based on rationally oriented metrics and frameworks. These forces, in isolation and in combination, have created a sense that marketing is really out of sync with the modern world. And that was the impetus and the inspiration for this idea of a new paradigm in marketing. And so 10 years ago, we started this exploration of really trying to understand how do we bond with brands that we use and love, and what can we learn from those moments of intimacy between us and brands. And interestingly, we bond with brands much like we bond with each other. It's highly reciprocal, and it's very fluid. We gathered over 240,000 different brand connections. We studied stories from 20,000 different brand experiences. We examined over 400 brands, and we did this across the world. And what we were looking for is something fundamental and something ultimately very straightforward and simple. This is our brand intimacy model. It's got 4 main components. I'm going to walk you through each of these in real quick detail. I think it's important to note that this model was arrived at through initially qualitative research studies and then validated through quantitative research work. The first and most important aspect of the model is predicated on you being a user of the brand. This isn't measuring associations or perceptions. You have to be a user of the brand to even be factored into the data. The next most important aspect of this is what we call archetypes. There are 6 unique characteristics to how we bond with a brand. Think of this like unique DNA. No 2 brands are identical, although certain industry has patterns of archetypes that are consistent. The 6 archetypes are, starting with fulfillment. Think of this as a brand that bonds with you through exceptional service or efficacy. A brand like Amazon is a great example of a brand that does well in fulfillment. Identity is a brand that's about an aspirational image or a brand that you share beliefs with. This is a very powerful archetype. And think of a brand like Patagonia or Body Shop as great examples of brands that are strong in their identity and beliefs. Next is enhancement. Generally, technology brands do well here. These are brands that are about making you smarter, better, more capable, more connected. Think of Apple or Samsung as great examples of a brand in enhancement. Ritual is the next archetype, and this is about a brand that you use on a daily basis. It forms part of your daily routine. And think of Starbucks as the kind of quintessential ritualistic brand. The next archetype is around nostalgia. This is a brand that evokes strong memories from your past. And think of a brand like Lego that had played maybe a powerful role in your life as you were growing up. That's a good example of a nostalgic brand. And finally is the indulgence archetype. This is a brand that's about those pampering moments of self-gratification. And beauty products do extremely well in indulgence. And also Netflix is a great example of an indulgence brand. When you are binge watching, you are ultimately in a kind of moment of indulgence. So those are the 6 archetypes. Now let's move to stages. Stages are about the degree of intensity of the bond that you're forming with brands. There are 3 important stages, moving from least to most. And the higher you move up the ladder of stages, the more important and valuable they become. The first stage is what we call sharing. Here, the brand and the stakeholder are first initially bonded. This is where information is being exchanged. You're learning more about the product or service, and it is of you. And that's what we call that sharing stage. The next stage is bonding. Here, you and the brand are becoming, in a sense, more monogamous. You're using its competitors less, and there's a degree of trust that's formed now between you and the brand. And finally, and most importantly, is the fusing stage. This is a relatively rare stage. You may have only a few of these brands in your life where you and the brand are, in a sense, inextricably linked. Your values and it are, in a way, a reflection of each other. Again, extremely rare, but extremely powerful stage of intimacy. And finally, we use the fact that you're a user of the brand, the mapping of the 6 archetypes, and the degrees of intensity, or the stages, as a way to measure the degree of bond that you have with a brand. We use an algorithm to calculate a score from 0 to 100. Great brands score in the 70s, average brands are in the 30s, and obviously weak brands perform below that. That was a very high-level tour of our model, and there's more information on our methodology on our website if you're so inclined. We'd like to now move on to describing what we do with this idea of brand intimacy, the emotional science of how we bond with the brands that we use and love. Brand intimacy is the basis of our theory and philosophy of how you build effective brands. It's the foundation of our book. It's also the foundation of our annual study of the world's most intimate brands. It's the largest study of emotion of its kind in the world, and it also provides marketers tools, a dashboard that you can use to interactively compare brands to each other and look at the subcomponents of intimacy that are forming. Over the last 10 years, we've amassed an immense amount of information about brands that do this well. We also look at industries, and it's interesting that financial services have historically done extremely poorly in building brand intimacy. They consistently rank in the lower third of industries in our annual studies. In addition to the industry data, we also look at demographic data, comparing intimate brands by age, by income, by gender. And then we also look at the forces that technology are having on brands. Is it helping? Is it hurting? Which industries take advantage of technology most and why? That information is extremely useful, but ultimately what proves out that this is valuable to our clients and ultimately the executives in charge of those companies is the fact that brand intimacy isn't just a great idea, it actually drives business results. We know the more intimate you are, the more on brand your behavior will be. We know that the more intimate you are, the more you're willing to pay for a product. We know that the more intimate a brand is, the more it outperforms. In fact, intimate brands outperform the Fortune 500 and Standard & Poor's indexes in profit and in revenue. This happens every year when we compare the data, and it's proof positive that ultimately what's behind this is something that aligns a culture to maximum performance. So if you're looking for and how to build a strong brand, we think brand intimacy can be a great compass for your marketing efforts. About a year and a half ago, the world changed for us, and the pandemic took hold of many of the countries around the world, and most of the brands were affected in some way or another. It led us to wonder, what was the effect that COVID had on brands? What could we learn from this moment in time when we were disassociated, isolated from each other, and from the world that we generally were functioning within? What I'm going to share with you next are 10 important findings from this COVID study, and what we'd like to also leave you with is an understanding of what brands can do to maybe come out of COVID in a more meaningful and effective way. The number one finding in our study is that intimacy actually grew during the pandemic. It grew across all the stages, sharing, bonding, and fusing, and also in the number of brands that we were bonding with. Consumers on average bonded with 23% more brands during the pandemic than prior. Here are the top 10 brands during COVID, and you'll see Apple at the number one spot. The brands that make up the top 10 are always in flux. There's general movement up and down. And what you see here is a mix of brands in technology, in media and entertainment, automotive, and other brands like retail. Media and entertainment is consistently the top ranking brand in our study. And you can see once again, financial services second last as a weaker performing industry. When we look at financial services in more detail, here you see a slide of the top 10 brands during COVID in America. In the US, you see that USAA ranks as the #1 brand and PayPal #2. And then you see a mix of either banks or credit card companies. What you'll notice is that the most iconic financial service brands in America aren't necessarily the ones that consumers are bonding with. And once again, you can see how weak the industry performs relative to the average and overall with other industries. Again, another indicator that there's a huge untapped potential for financial service brands to bond more meaningfully with its stakeholders. It's clear we have a relationship with our money that we feel very strongly of, but not necessarily with the institutions that we use to manage or leverage it. Here's another interesting finding. When we look at archetypes across all industries in our study during COVID, the nostalgia archetype actually rose to the top as the most important one. And that's new. This is related to the fact that we were looking back to a time that we were likely looking to return to. And what's interesting about the brands in nostalgia is that Campbell's Soup was the #1 brand in America again during COVID, an indicator that we were looking for that comfort or escapism. When we look at stages, the top performing brand across the 3 stages, remember that fusing stage is a really key and important one, and Apple tops that stage and does so consistently year over year. This is a brand that's really hitting on all cylinders, that really understands how to build strong bonds with its customers. Other new performers, rising brands that performed really well during the pandemic, both Zoom and Purell, no surprise, did extremely well. These were brands that became pivotal parts of our lives. And we can imagine that going forward, they're going to take advantage of the role that they played and probably find new and interesting ways to maintain their relevance past the pandemic. But it's incredible how they took advantage of this moment really meaningful ways. Other brands that did extremely well continue to do even more so, and 2 great examples of that in our study are Netflix and Amazon. And here's a great example of 2 brands that use their personalization and ability to really understand their customers to shape product and services that match to the preferences almost on a one-to-one basis. This is an interesting finding from our study, and it proves out year over year, and that is that the closer the brand is to the actual hardware, the physical attribute of the technology, the more credit it gets for the magic of that technology. So for example, the hardware manufacturers of the phone get more of the credit for that device than do the content brands, the access brands, or even the apps and social media brands that live on the phone. This proves out year over year, and it shows that ultimately the physical and tactile nature of the hardware drives a lot of our bond with it. This is true for software gaming platforms and other hardware categories that we investigate. Here are the demographic findings from our study. You'll see differences here by gender, age, and income. And what's most important is when we look at this from an industry perspective, here are the differences in financial services, again in the US. And what you're noticing here is that a brand like PayPal that does very well, #2 ranking brand in our study, performs extremely well with lower income and more youthful audiences, and possibly a predictor of future successes as it relates to its business and likely brand intimacy. Another interesting thing that we explore in parallel with our findings is how brands are communicating with their stakeholders. And during the pandemic, we watched very carefully to see how brands were differing in their language, their tone, their style, and the content of their messaging. This is looking at the financial services brands in the US, and we explored some 64,000 different words to analyze how were people standing out from each other. What were they saying that was really resonating or possibly affecting the brand in either positive and negative ways. And you can see here the comparison of PayPal versus its peers or competitors, how it stands out in different. You know, this is a brand that's about emphasizing how simple it is to use, how it's really oriented around helping you, and how it's encouraging small business. Those were just 3 of the top messages that resonated most with PayPal across its channels. And also you can see the number, the factor, the amount of volume that those messages outperformed its competitors. So for example, its simplicity message was 6 times mentioned more than anything in its competitive set. So this is a really useful way for us to discern how do you stand out amongst your peers, how do you connect with your stakeholders through language in meaningful ways. Those are just some of the findings from our COVID study. There's a wealth of information available for you. The study and overall rankings themselves are of interest, of course, but then you can dive in and learn more by industry. There's articles that have been published on each of the 10 industries for the last year's study. And also there's an interactive dashboard that you can use to compare brands to each other. Brand intimacy for us is ultimately the true north of how we orient and build intimate brands. And we do that whether it's a business-to-business brand or a business-to-consumer brand. We do it across industries and scales of brands, from nonprofits to huge multinationals, and even individual athlete brands or entertainer brands, individual person brands, also can use some of these lessons to build stronger bonds with their stakeholders. Thank you for your time and attention today. We hope this was helpful and useful for you. We think brand intimacy can be an effective way to leverage brands for the future. We hope you take advantage of this information that's available. We have a wealth of resources on our website that you could use, and happy to answer any questions or comments. You can reach us at the channels that are listed here. Thank you very much and have a great day.